everyone. Today's lesson is on speciation. So we're going to take a look at how do the principles of natural selection lead to speciation. So the first question you might have is, what is speciation? Speciation is the creation of a new species. So it's the process in which a new species is going to be created. There are two main ways that speciation can happen. It can happen naturally, which is most often how it happens, or some species have been artificially created, and we'll talk about that. Naturally, the way speciation can happen is through natural selection. So if you remember from our last lesson, natural selection is when organisms with traits that better enable them to adapt to their environment survive and reproduce. So when this natural selection process happens, it causes beneficial inherited traits to become more common in a population. So if you remember, mutations are how we lead to these variations. And when you start to have these variations and you start to have more and more beneficial inherited traits becoming more common, over a period of time, that can end up changing a species of organisms. Okay, so natural selection is the mechanism behind evolution. Evolution, if you remember, is the change of a species over time, species of organism over time. So natural selection can lead to a change of species over time, which is evolution, and this is actually called speciation. So this process where a new species is formed. So one of the things that can cause speciation is something called artificial selection. And this is where humans select organisms to breed. So when we look at speciation, something that has happened is wolves have gone through this speciation process, and from wolves, we've gotten domesticated dogs. And humans have artificially selected for these different dogs. And so there's all different varieties and different breeds of dogs, and humans have artificially selected traits to make those different species of dogs. And you'll be able to see an Ed Puzzle video that is in a little bit that, or as part of this lesson, that is going to talk about dogs and artificial selection. So that's going to be an Ed Puzzle video that you'll be watching. So how does speciation occur naturally? Well, speciation occurs naturally when there is reproductive isolation. This means that organisms are somehow separated and they're not able to reproduce with each other. So what can lead to reproductive isolation? Well, there's two main things. Organisms can be geographically isolated, which means there's something keeping them from actually being close to each other. And they can be behaviorally isolated. Okay, so let's take a look at geographical isolation first. Geographically, if a species of organism is created this way, it's called allopatric speciation. Basically, it means groups of the same species are isolated because of land, because of geography. So, for example, maybe there's a mountain range that comes in between two groups of the same species. Maybe there's a canyon that forms. Maybe there's rivers or streams. And these geographical features somehow separate the organisms in the same species. You can also have reproductive isolation behaviorally. This is called sympatric speciation. In sympatric speciation, the behavior of two groups of the same species differs, and the different behavior results in speciation. So for example, having different mating seasons. If you are organisms in the same species, but one group of you mates in the spring and one group of you mates in the fall, that's going to lead to reproductive isolation, because those organisms that reproduce in the spring are not going to reproduce with the organisms that are reproducing in the fall. So This is basically what we're looking at, is how do the principles of natural selection lead to speciation. Speciation is when we have the creation of a new species. And natural selection leads to this. So organisms over a period of time adapting to their environment, having those changes take place, allows for speciation to occur. If you have isolation geographically, that is called allopatric speciation, and groups of the same species are isolated, and so because of the environment that they're living in, they will adapt to that specific area. And so eventually, if that geographical barrier isn't there anymore, when those two organisms come back together, they're not going to be able to interbreed anymore because they're so different. You can also have sympatric speciation, where it's the behavior of two groups of the same species differing that causes this reproductive isolation. If you have any questions, remember office hours are 1 to 2 p.m. Please stop by and ask questions if you have them. Thank you. Bye.